My name's Linda Reynolds and I was an Army officer for nearly 35 years in the Australian Army Reserves and in the regular Army. I was a logistics officer and then I became a senior officer. In fact, I was the first woman to become a brigadier. I enlisted in the Army Reserves as an 18-year-old and I joined up at Karrakatta. No one was more surprised than my parents when I came home and told them that I had enlisted in the Army Reserves. But at the time I was sharing a house with a tech friend of mine who I was going to tech with, and she was a driver in the Army Reserves, and I just had to join up and serve because she was enjoying it so much. But instead of general enlisting, they suggested I try out for officer cadet training. And I didn't really know what that involved, but I thought I'd give it a go. And I got through and I became Second Lieutenant Reynolds and went into the Corps of Transport. And 35 years later, I left the Army as a brigadier, and it was such an amazing 35 years. As a young 18-year-old woman, it was a real shock joining the Army Reserves and doing officer cadet training, and it pushed me in ways that I hadn't experienced before. But it was the best thing that could have happened to me, and it really changed my life. It taught me how to lead, how to make decisions, and how to organise things. And those are skills that not only set me up really well in the military, but they also set me up for my life, but also for my career in politics as well. So when I graduated as a second lieutenant, I graduated into the Royal Australian Corps of Transport, and I had many different roles as a young officer. I was a movements officer, where I was trained how to organise and to move an army, which again it was a great skill in learning how to move the army. I was also a road transport officer, a watercraft transport officer, and my early days were at Blackwall Reach down near Fremantle in the watercraft and moving people and materials around for the army. One of the most memorable and wonderful roles that I had was a commanding officer of a combat service support battalion, and as a battalion commander I was responsible for hundreds of men and women and providing logistical support for the army. Things like medical support, transport, engineering, and of course very importantly catering support, and also stores support. Again, really great experiences leading men and women and making decisions and keeping the army moving and keeping it fed and keeping it healthy. I had so many memorable moments in the army, both here and experience overseas, but one of the greatest memories I carry with me is the memories of the friendships that I've made through my many years of service. And there is something about the friends that you make with the people that you serve with that is very, very special. And you will make friends and you won't see them for many years, but then when you reconnect, it is like our friendship has never been broken. And that's one of the most wonderful memories I take away, and I know so many other servicemen and women do. It's not just the experiences, but it's the people that you have the experiences with, and you create a really unbreakable bond. Looking back, one of the best things about being in the Army Reserves was, as a young officer, learning how to lead and learning how to manage. But that was also one of the most challenging times as well, is as a 21-year-old young woman leading troops of mostly men at the time, and standing in front of them and telling them what to do and how to do it was one of the most challenging, but again that was also one of the most rewarding. But learning those skills and that having that ability at such a young age as a young woman really has stood me and many other women in good stead, because you realise that to be a good leader, it doesn't matter your gender or your age, it's actually how you listen to your team members and how you communicate with them and tell them what the mission is, what the role is, what the job is, and explain to them why. And no matter what age your team is and what gender your team is, if you lead well, you'll explain, you listen, they will respect you and they will do the job. And that was such an important lesson for me, and I was so lucky to have learnt that at such a young age in the Army Reserves. One of the greatest achievements that I'm so proud of is becoming the first female brigadier in the Australian Army Reserves and working full-time at Army headquarters in a role that impacted on the lives and the service of all men and women in the Army as the Army's Adjutant General. But then, when I did leave Army, I became the Minister for Defence, and for over 2 years I was responsible for all men and women who serve in our Army, Air Force and Navy, and that was an incredible privilege, but also a very great responsibility. But in that time, through the decisions that I made as Minister for new capabilities, for the equipment that our men and women need, to be responsible for those decisions, working with the Chief of Defence Force and the Service Chiefs, was an incredible privilege and a great honour. And I'm certain that my many years of service made me a much better minister, because I could relate and I could understand not only to the capabilities that we needed, but also to what we needed to deliver to keep our men and women as safe as possible. But the highlight, the absolute highlight of my time as Minister for Defence was getting out and meeting our troops, both out across Australia on exercises, training, being recruited, and that was the best possible part, is to meet men and women of all ages and of men and women who stood up and said, I want to serve our nation. And that made me so proud. And I was particularly proud to go overseas and to meet our men and women who are deployed overseas in many countries, working with the militaries of many nations, of our friends and our allies, and seeing the wonderful job they do as diplomats for Australia in these roles, but also going to Afghanistan in particular and meeting with our men and women who were serving and had served there for so long with such great distinction. And that made me incredibly proud to be an Australian, to be an Australian servicewoman, and to be the Minister for Defence for our great nation.